Welcome to ancient Greece, home of epic battles, powerful thinkers, and two city-states that couldn't have been more different, Athens and Sparta. In this lesson, we're going to be comparing these two great rivals to explore what made them unique so that you can eventually decide if you are an Athenian or a Spartan. So picture this. You're a young person in ancient Greece. Would you rather grow up in a place where education and the arts are highly valued, or a place where you're trained from childhood to be a soldier? That's the choice between Athens and Sparta, free to debate and create, or trained to fight and serve. So just the basics. Both Athens and Sparta were known as a polis, or a city-state. Athens had about 140,000 citizens, while Sparta had around 8,000. This doesn't include their 100,000 individual enslaved people. Now, if you open up to pages 14 and 15 in your blue Greek workbook, we're going to take a look at what happened in Athens and what happened in Sparta, and we're going to compare the two on the next couple slides. So now that we've looked at a day in the life of an Athenian and a day in the life of a Spartan, let's really get into the nitty-gritty. So just a reminder, we are looking at two city-states. Remember, a city-state or a polis is an independent city with its own government, its own army, and its own set of laws. So you can see on our map here that Sparta resides on the Peloponnesian Peninsula, and it's kind of close to Athens. They both have access to waterways. However, Athens definitely used it more to their advantage, and we'll see that in later slides. So like I said, each city-state or polis in ancient Greece was kind of like its own mini country. Athens and Sparta were two of the most powerful city-states, but they had completely different ways of life. And this honestly stems from their geography. So Athens was located in central Greece, roughly 4 miles from the Aegean Sea. This allowed them to have extensive trading routes and a very, very powerful navy. Whereas Sparta, on the other hand, was isolated on that Peloponnesian Peninsula. It had mountains all around it, and its closest harbor was over 25 miles away. Because of this, they had to focus more on what they did have instead of what they didn't. This allowed them to become excellent farmers because they had great soil for growing crops. Each of these city-states also had very different government styles. So Athens, known as the birthplace of democracy, is famous for inventing this style of government where all citizens, by all citizens I mean men over the age of 18, were able to vote directly on laws. So all free men in Athens could participate, and this wasn't a perfect system. Women, slaves, and foreigners could not vote, but it was revolutionary for the time to have all citizens have their voice be heard. Daily business was run by a council of 500, so 500 Athenian men were chosen to make these daily decisions. Sparta, on the other hand, had an oligarchy. This is a government led by a small group of people. They had two kings, but the real power was held by a council and a group of overseers called ephors. So this system was designed to keep strict military order and military control. We know that both of these city-states greatly valued the military, Athens being the leader of the Delian League, Sparta being leader of the Peloponnesian League. So they had very different ideas in how their military should run. Athens believed that they should wait until age 18 in order to begin their military training for men. After their formal training, boys could choose how to live out the rest of their lives. They could stay in the military, or they could go back and become a merchant or an artisan. Now, Sparta, on the other hand, was very different. They valued strength, discipline, and overall obedience. Boys were taken from their homes at age 7 to begin intense military training, and even girls were expected to exercise and be strong in order to raise strong children. Everything revolved around serving the city-state of Sparta. Now, who was educated and how are they educated? As I've already said before, Athens greatly values education of their citizens. So there was a lot of emphasis on learning and becoming a well-rounded individual. Boys were taught how to read and write and speak so that they could participate in the government. Public speaking and use of logic were essential. So Athens really became the center of Greek culture and intellectual life. Women in Athens were taught household skills because they weren't necessarily able to become citizens, so they weren't taught a lot of these reading and writing skills. Sparta, on the other hand, demanded that citizens dedicate themselves to the good of the state and the military. There wasn't a lot of time left over for formal education in the midst of their military training. However, girls were taught some of these reading and writing skills beginning at age 7 and eventually would have more rights than Athenian women. So daily life within each of these city-states looked very different. Athenians are mingling in the agora or the marketplace. They're debating politics. They're pursuing learning, while our Spartans lived in a military-style barracks. They focused on training, preparing for war, and luxury and comfort were greatly discouraged for Spartan citizens. We also see that Spartan babies were placed on mountainsides to determine their strength. People weren't allowed to own luxuries. So these societies were starkly different from each other. One, figuring out how to work together and be this very democratic society, while the other is focused on becoming very self-reliant and strong. So now it's time to get ready for our Socratic seminar. As our friend Socrates would say, if you could choose to live in Athens or Sparta, where would you choose and why? Remember, Socrates is the father of the Socratic method. He's all about questioning and digging deeper. So as you start thinking about which one you would like to be in, you're going to have to formulate your entire argument. So you'll have to be ready to defend your choice in our upcoming seminar. You're going to step into the shoes of either an Athenian or a Spartan to debate which city-state was better. So before class, please make sure to finish your graphic organizer. You can go back and rewatch this video, pause at any time in order to make sure that you get your notes filled in. And in class, we're going to compare ideas, and then it'll be time for our seminar. Will you fight for Sparta or argue for Athens? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.